just briefly, give us a quick overview of where Sainsbury's is at the moment. I'm assuming all of you have heard of Sainsbury's, one of the largest retailers in the UK, but I'm sure you'd like to give us a brief overview of where you are, and particularly on your 20 by 20 plan.
Well, I've never missed an opportunity to acquire a few more customers. So let's just check. How many in the room shop with Sainsbury's?
Well, actually, there's a few you can convert.
That's not too bad, is it? Well, our market share is about 17%, so we're probably slightly overrepresented in the room. Let's see what we can do if we can convert a few this morning. I mean, where to start? I think, you know, to my mind, on this issue, that there are really two types of companies. There are companies that are doing it, if you like, inside out, and those that are doing it outside in. You know, there's no doubt a lot of companies are responding to the changing world and the fact that customers are placing demands on them that they've never placed on corporations before. But for a business like ours, we're just celebrating, actually this weekend, we've just celebrated our 145th anniversary. And the founding principle of our organisation was the sustainability issue of its day. In the mid-Victorian era, an urban poor were being poisoned by their food, literally poisoned by their food. And the founding principle of the business was safe food that was exactly what it said on the tin, so to speak. It doesn't feel like much has changed in 145 years, does it? And it said over the door of the first store, quality perfect, price is lower. And it doesn't feel like much has changed on that agenda in 145 years too. So for us, it's always been inside out. And if you look at our history, we have a very proud record of innovation on what one might call the sustainability issues of the day. More recently, you know, during my tenure, as you said, I'm stepping down in a couple of months' time. I've been in the job for 10 years. And more recently, I think we've had probably the clearest articulation of what sustainability means to us in our business. Again, it came from the inside out. Our 5 principles, which we first articulated in their current form about 8 years ago, and then with the launch more recently, 3 years ago, of our 2020 sustainability plan, which you talked about, which are 20 commitments that we've made against those 5 principles. Now, the interesting thing about those 5 principles is that they were very much part of the way that we do business. They describe our business model. I'm not going to do it now, but I'd encourage you, if you're not familiar with them, to go on Sainsbury's website and see how they do tell the journey of our business. And if you went back to 2007-8, the start of this economic slowdown, the most commonly asked question of us was, given that it's now all going to be about price, a hard-pressed consumer in the pursuit of ever cheaper prices, is this now relevant? And we said, well, actually, we think it's more relevant because price doesn't, in the end, differentiate. And what will cause people to keep shopping with us will be the things that make us different, our values, because they truly make us different. And we've been conspicuously the most successful of the major grocers over the last 5 or 6 years, and we would put sustainability, quality, those things beyond price, which make up value for money, absolutely at the top of the list for reasons why. Our 2020 commitments are on the key agenda items that our customers told us. We didn't sit down one day and say, what are our big issues as a business? We asked our customers and they told us what they thought a business like ours should face into. They're intentionally stretching. I've said before publicly, in all probability, we won't achieve most of them. One of the problems that I have on this agenda is that people tend to go one way or the other. They set ludicrous targets so far into the future that, frankly, they serve no useful purpose. Because the great thing about a target for 2030 or 2040 is if you're not on the trajectory to achieving it in the first 4 or 5 years, you can believe in hockey sticks for a very long time. But similarly, if you only set targets 1 or 2 years out on an agenda that, frankly, needs very different thinking, you're not going to stretch that thinking. So we chose 2020 partly because it works as a piece of communication. I'm a great believer in that too. It's 20 commitments for 2020. But we felt it's kind of far enough away that you would have to think differently because you could set really challenging targets with 9 years to run at them. But close enough that you have to get on with it. You know, if you're, as we are now, 3 years out of 9 down, and the line's not pointing at where you said it's going to be, you're going to have to do something pretty different pretty quickly if you're going to get that.
So M&S, where you used to work, famously is slightly ahead of some of the other supermarkets in terms of their big picture plan. And they have revised and expanded those targets under Plan A. And I just wonder, looking at your targets this morning, would you advocate a review process at a certain period? For example, deforestation. You've got a no deforestation footprint target for 2020. A lot of the higher impact, higher deforestation footprint companies are under increasing pressure to bring that target forward now. NGOs are saying 2020 is too late. So, I mean, what's your thinking on a review process for it in terms of expanding or tightening things up where you can?
Well, I won't get into it, although I don't necessarily accept the thought process that lies behind your assertion about M&S, but I did work there. Let me just deal with that point. I mean, yes, of course, if you have targets, frankly, it turns out that time has either made those targets redundant or too easy, or actually the other extreme, impossible, then you can't ignore the march of time. So, of course, you should review them. But I think if intentionally it was 20, not thousands. And I think too many businesses, what's the point of having 150 targets saying we've achieved 135 of them if the 15 you haven't are the really important ones? And I think that is too much part of this agenda, if you like. We're confident that the 20, there's a bit, you could haggle a bit around the edges that maybe the, in inverted commas, last 3 or 4, and might there be 3 or 4 that go in. But we're confident they're the right agenda. But if we have to aim off, we'll aim off. But I think, to talk about deforestation, the question there is, we all know it's a race against time. I don't think there's much of a dispute there. It's whether something material that should change our view at a point in time comes along. I think what's tending to happen a lot on this agenda item is a kind of almost like a creeping aggression. When companies have all got to a certain place, those for whom it's their number one agenda item want to drag companies onto the next agenda. Now that might, it's understandable because everyone's always looking for progress to be made. But the thing that will generally move corporations, actually will change individuals' views, is genuinely new information. And if you look at the health agenda, for example, if you look what's just recently happened about the shift from 5 a day to 7 a day. Now, I've really struggled with that. We have a message which is 5 a day, which has landed by common consent really well with the consumer in the UK. The scientific evidence is 5 is not in absolute terms the right number. Why was 5 chosen? Because at the time the UK population was at 3. So just getting people to register more fruit and veg, and currently it's about 3, let's get to 5. As we've started to move towards 5, those on this agenda are saying, well, let's make it 7. But actually the UK population is still at 3.5. 7 is not going to shock them into making any more progress than 5. But by moving to 7, you confuse the message because 5 has landed so strongly. And I think that's a simple way of describing what happens on a lot of this sustainability agenda. If you pull the target away from people when it still feels in reach, actually what you do is you undermine the power of the message. And a lot of the reason that people disengage on this agenda is because they hear conflicting messages. And we see a lot in our research of consumers virtually saying, when you've all made up your mind what the answer is, tell us what it is, and then we might do something about it. And health is the most classic example of that, because we've all heard that red wine is bad for us, red wine is good for us, broccoli is good for us, broccoli is... And actually for a lot of people, the tendency is to just say, well, do you know what, this is too difficult, I won't engage, because I feel pretty healthy today.
So what are you proudest of in your decade at Sainsbury's? Obviously you're known as I wouldn't quite say, perhaps it's going over the top to say saved the company, but you certainly took the company from being in a difficult position to being in a much better one today. When we think about how you've integrated sustainability into business strategy, which I know Sainsbury's has been doing for a long time, in the first ever event we ever did, we had Alison Austin here from Sainsbury's talking about how you guys were basically supporting the Woodward Isles economies through banana sourcing, even though you didn't make any money off them and it would have been cheaper to buy from Ecuador. So I know you guys have a very long history in this field. But what are you proudest of in the last 5 or 10 years in terms of integrating sustainability into strategy?
Well, I think to the wider point in that question, we had our annual results a couple of weeks ago, and at the end of the presentation, the analysts, who are not given to passing any positive comment at all if they can possibly avoid it, one of the analysts did stand up and say, in fairness, he said, I don't suppose I speak for many people in the room, but I'm prepared to admit we've spent 10 years saying that this was about to go horribly wrong, and for 10 years the business has kept getting better. And I think what was embedded in that observation was a continued failure to understand on the part of that community quite how material to the success of our business this agenda is. And so in a way I'm so proud, if you like, of proving the doubters wrong. But that's not me that's done that. One of the reasons that this works is that it works for our 160,000 customers, 160,000 colleagues. When they talk to their mates in the pub on a Friday night, they might talk about the pay award, because we've just done a very strong pay award in the context of our industry. They might talk about the profits of the company, the sales of the company, because they're proud to be part of a successful organisation. But like as not, they'll talk about what we do on Active Kids, or what we're doing in the Windward Islands, or what we did around the Paralympics and sport. Those are the things that really make people proud for the organisation that they work for. And our labour turnover today is half what it was when I joined. Now, there's a real payback in that, because it means our customers are being served by more committed, more loyal, more engaged colleagues than they would otherwise be. But I think it's in some ways it's the clearest measure that our colleagues are proud of the organisation of which they're part.
Now you're leaving, as we've established, the company in pretty good shape. You're also going to hand over to a sort of, I wouldn't say hand-picked successor, because I'm sure the board and others play a key role here, but I've met Mike Coop, who's spoken at our events before. Is it easier to hand over to someone who you know and you've worked with, and are you more secure about the sort of legacy of sustainability carrying on because of that?
Well, it's not easy to hand over. It kind of feels like your baby, and it's not an easy thing to do. Although, I've had in my mind for really quite a long time, probably 4 or 5 years, I've been circling, going at around this sort of time. I've always believed the idea of a two-term presidency, which exists in many political systems, actually has at its heart a very solid ethos, which is, you should go at a time when hopefully people kind of don't want you to go, would like you to stay, when you've still got plenty in the tank, and my intention is to go and do something else, I'm not sure what yet, but also at a time that you can be confident that the business is going well. I think too often leaders want to drain the tank because ego gets in the way. I believe that one of the key judgments of success of leadership is if you can leave an organisation and it's successful after you've left. The problem with ego is that a little part of you, and I'm no different from any other kind of egotistical CEO, part of you kind of hopes that might not be true, because then it will prove how brilliant you were in the first place. Now, I hope that thought doesn't overtake the first one, and going, I suppose you might call it the Gary Lineker school of retirement, going when there might be still the odd record to pick off, but actually you've got your mind focused on what else you might be able to contribute to, if you like, second career, if you like. That felt like the right thing to do. And in that regard, absolutely internally, because the values of our business are such a powerful part of our competitive dynamic that we don't want to miss a beat on that. And too often, I think new leaders, particularly when they're external, feel they have to change everything for its own sake. One of the stories I tell about the turnaround of Sainsbury's is that we launched, most of the board, the very senior leadership went, and the business was in real difficulty, and that was right. They had led the business to that place. But we launched an incentive plan called Making Sainsbury's Great Again. It was aligned to the business plan. There were just over 1,000 of our senior leaders in it. It was the same targets for me as for all of those 1,000 people. 4 years later, it paid out in full. You can go and find out how much it paid out to me in the Daily Mail, because that's a matter of public record. But it paid out across the business. And less than 5% of the people in that incentive plan had left over the 4 years. And you could argue that's the power of incentive plans to retain, but I'd argue something different, which is that the same people who'd been running that business in its darkest hour were the same people that turned it around and put it in a better place. And that's because it came from within. That's because it came from the values of the organisation. That's because it was focusing on the DNA of the organisation. So it's the stuff I didn't change that was the most important part of our success. And I think that gets lost.
And how have you managed to communicate across 160,000 employees how the company is changing. I noticed you've done a lot of videos recently on your website using real employees talking about living the Sainsbury's values.
Yeah.
You know, what are the other ways in which you've managed to get the message across? Because I mean, there's a lot of people to talk to about, you know, how things have changed in the last 10 years.
We have to be relentless about communication, and we have been, and we take every opportunity to communicate with and to listen to our colleagues. We've embraced new media, but at the same time not forgotten the power of old media. I think, again, if you look at a lot of organisations who are embracing new media, I think because they found communicating, in inverted commas, the old way too hard. But actually, generally speaking, what's worth doing is hard to do. I still write every month, never more than 2 sides of A4, a note to every colleague. It's a physical note, gets printed off in store. It's generally either given to colleagues as part of their monthly briefing or might get clipped to their pay slips, whatever it might be. And it's incredibly powerful. I know it's read. We think it gets to between 70 and 75% of our colleagues. Part of the reason I know it's read, and I had an example of it just this weekend, I was in Edinburgh Airport Saturday, it was, and a lady came up to me and said, "Oh, you're Justin King, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes," and I assumed she was a colleague. Anyway, it turned out that her daughter worked for Sainsbury's, but the reason she knew me was she read the note every month, because her daughter takes it home. And she was taking an interest in where her daughter was working. That's a powerful dynamic in our business. So relentless communication, listening to colleagues. I still, this morning, I did my normal Monday morning thing, which is sign colleague letters from the previous week. Anybody that writes to me by name, I respond to personally. Well, I have a team of people that write the letters and I sign them, but I read the letter and I read the reply. And I did that this morning. And I'm still doing that with 2 months to go because it's still an important part of the DNA of the organisation.
So in a world where so many things have become digital, actually the handwritten signed note and letter, you give them 2 examples there, that's an incredibly powerful tool. Interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, it might surprise you to know that I get almost as many letters from customers complimenting Sainsbury's on what we're doing as complaining. And that's another sort of thoroughly nice part of the society of which we're all part. Actually, people are quick to say congratulations, just as they are quick to say you got it wrong. And one of the, I have a graduate trainee that works in my team on a sort of 1-year rotation basis. And part of their job is to track down the colleagues, because quite often a customer will write in and say, look, I was in this store, this amazing thing happens, I think they were called Jerry, but I don't really know who they were. And we always resolute. We find out who the colleague is, and I send them a handwritten note. We have a thing in our business which may raise the odd eyebrow. They're called love points. They are our way of saying congratulations to people. They have a value. They can be converted into cash. You get a little check with them on. It stands for something. Love stands for something. Obviously, it stands for love. It stands for live our values every day, which I rather like. It's a very powerful internal message. Around half of them are never cashed because people keep the checks as a memento of someone saying congratulations. And that's worth more to them than the actual cash that's on the check. In fact, I've only ever been given one in my time at Sainsbury's, and I've still got it, which is kind of proof of the point, because it was such a surprise that someone said thank you to me, because that's not normally what happens to the boss.
Although you do reply to letters, and you do get letters of congratulations. I know this because my mother wrote to you a while ago, and you replied.
Oh, you set that up as a test, didn't you?
No, my mother writes to everybody.
Be honest.
No, my mother writes to everybody. She can make a living writing
Was
letters.
it a good reply?
It was, actually. She wrote a letter of complaint about something, saying crumpets weren't as good as they were 10 years ago, I think. And she got a reply saying, we're making improvements. She was happy, and then she wrote back about 6 months later saying that she thought they were better.
They got better.
So,
good, excellent.
So I have actually seen those letters. So.
Good.
But famously, you guys have also used social media to communicate in a sort of amusing way with customers. And I have to say, Sainsbury's is pretty much the only corporate Twitter feed I actually go and look at now and again, just because normally you just see a logo on Twitter, you think, God, how boring will this be? But actually, you give people, you empower people to be quite engaging and use.
So this is the power of values and in an organisation. So if you have a clearly articulated sense of values, it becomes almost self-selecting. You know, when I start, I meet with our graduate intake every year, and you know I've seen over the last 10 years a real change from graduates saying what I would have said, which was essentially what's in this for me. You know, when I went to my first organisation, I said, how am I going to get on? How am I going to get promoted? What opportunities am I going to have? Our graduates today say, tell me about this part of the organisation. Are we going to drive this agenda? Because they've joined a business which they believe is aligned with their values, and they're at least as concerned about that as what it might mean for them. Because they recognise that if you are in an organisation where your values align, that ultimately you're more likely to be successful because you'll do your job, you'll do your job better. So if you have clearly articulated values, this is what we stand for, this is what we're going to try and make a difference to, it's amazing how much empowerment you can give, because people understand what, in inverted commas, the right thing to do is, and feel empowered to do it. And whether that's customer service or dealing with Twitter, you know, the famous stuff that we've done in that kind of environment didn't go through any sign-off or tick box process. It was a colleague empowered to make a difference, doing what they thought was the right thing. And you know, we have an internal equivalent of Facebook, I suppose you'd call it that. We have about 70,000, so a little less than half of our colleagues registered on it, probably half of those using it regularly. And we spent ages debating how we were going to moderate it. And eventually someone said, if we trust our colleagues, why would we moderate it? We don't moderate it. I think we've taken it's something bizarre, like we've taken one post down in 4 years or something.
And presumably you can mine that for ideas.
Oh, but that's the point, is that if you liberate people. I just this morning signed a letter to a colleague. It was a Tell Justin. Now, a Tell Justin normally would be on a postcard or the electronic equivalent of it. Have you thought about doing this kind of thing? And they're all answered by a member of the board. For the first year or so, I answered every single one, but we are now 70-odd thousand and counting. We've still got about 200 a week. It's just an incredibly rich source of knowledge and information about our business. But this one I signed this morning was 22 pages long. And this lady had sat down, and it was the best appraisal of a store manager I'd ever seen, because she went through everything that wasn't functioning right. It was all, I mean, it was like a dissertation. Maybe it was, maybe that's actually, may turn out she's a student, she did it. But it was just utterly brilliant. I mean, the only person that can really deal with it in truth is the store manager, because it was just a list of things that could be better. But what was interesting, at the heart of the letter were only two thoughts. How can we make this a better place for colleagues to work in and a better place for customers to shop in? And how can you possibly have an issue with someone that works for you wanting to give you 22 pages of ideas about that?
Fantastic.